Are cartoons too violent for children? Most people would say, no, of course not. What kind of stupid question is that?
Censorship can get a bad rap in today's world, and it's easy to see why. The way it can ruin films and video games, or destroy someone's livelihood is just depressing. Is art allowed to just exist in peace? When will the depression end? Censorship is the suppression of information, such as a piece of media or a political speech, or sometimes even an individual person. This is often done on the basis that the material being censored is considered to be harmful or sensitive to the masses. But what makes something offensive? And who calls the shots to say what deserves to be censored? Censorship has been around for hundreds of years, and it's caused major controversy ever since it was conceived. Way before the cancelling of your favourite YouTuber, the public were actually censoring historical Greek philosophers. The first known form of censorship dates all the way back to 399 BC in the city of Athens. Greek philosopher Socrates was the first known victim of being censored. Socrates didn't believe in any of the Greek gods that were widely considered to be true, and a lot of the residents of Athens hated him for this. They also didn't like how he regularly embarrassed his naysayers by making them seem ignorant and foolish. Socrates' abrasive and combative attitude inspired disrespect for authority from his younger followers, and later on he was censored to death because of these crimes. His story is a woeful tale and it's still kind of relevant today. But of course, censorship didn't just end with cancelling public figures. Censorship eventually started to affect art, and one of the most well-known cases is with Michelangelo's statue of David. Legend has it that Queen Victoria was shocked by the statue's nudity, and a detachable leaf was created just for when she visited the statue. And even in our progressive modern age, censorship is still very much a thing. In some ways it's even more prevalent today. You see many times that individuals are chastised for even having an opinion, or for even trying to say something a little challenging. It happens on either side of the coin. And of course this happens on the internet again and again and again. Should negative reviews of wildlife movies be censored? Should entire review websites be shut down? The censorship of specifically media has been prevalent throughout the 20th century. At one point, every single piece of media has been criticised and blamed for real life issues. In more recent times, this has been video games, and the question always arises on if they cause violence. This has also happened with films, music and books. Yes, there was a time when even books were scrutinised for their content. It is weird to think that they were an issue at some point, because there isn't any age ratings or guidance on books like there is with other media. I guess it boils down to this. Most individuals who want to censor media are not the type of people who educate themselves by reading books. And because of all these factors, censorship has been criticised throughout the ages for being unjustified and for hindering progress in society. Some have argued that censorship is counterproductive because it prevents the censored topic from being discussed. If the people that try to censor things really believe what they think to be true, then surely they would welcome the opportunity for other individuals to oppose their views. It's often a paradoxical argument, because when something gets censored straight away, there's often no room for discussion. Censorship often removes any nuance to a piece of media, and it makes it feel bland and soulless. It's comparable to being used to making fresh food at home, and then switching to eating McDonald's every day. Sure, it's fine enough for a while, but you will eventually get sick of it. Why make an original piece of work with challenging themes and ideas, when it runs the risk of offending an individual or a foreign market? It's almost like these companies have forgotten that often the most risk-taking pieces of media are also the ones that have stood the test of time. The Simpsons have been no strangers to the discussion of censorship. The series thrived in the 1990s, and this was a time when a lot of America was sick of the 80s culture. The the conservative-leaning politics of the 1980s, and also the nostalgia of the wholesome 1940s family caused people to feel quite disenfranchised with the media and the government. 80s TV shows like The Waltons portrayed the ideal squeaky clean version of the American household. The Waltons were set during the Great Depression and World War II, yet it still managed to show a wholesome presentation of the family dynamic. It's almost like they were subliminally telling the public how they should behave in society. But there was only so much of the 80s culture that people could take in one time, and a lot of the country seemed to be getting tired of it. This brings us to The Simpsons. Although this was a cartoon sitcom based on yellow people, it felt a whole lot more genuine and real than a lot of the media released before it. The show is a satirical depiction of the American life, and it made fun of 80s and 90s society and also Western culture, and also consumerism itself. The show also presented the American household as dysfunctional, which made it feel more relatable for the audiences watching it. You know, for the time it was almost too real for some people to accept. The character of Bart in particular received a lot of backlash for his behaviour on the show, which led to some people calling him a poor role model for children. Some schools even claimed that Bart was a threat to learning, and this was due to him being an underachiever, and also his negative attitude in regards to his education. In 1992, President George H.W. Bush made a statement in regards to the show.
Well, let me tell you something. We are going to keep on trying to strengthen the American family, to make American families a lot more like the Waltons and a lot less like the Simpsons.
The Simpsons quickly came out with a reply to this comment 3 days later.
To make American families a lot more like the Waltons and a lot less like the Simpsons.
Huh? Hey, we're just like the Waltons. We're praying for an end to the Depression, too.
Even when a piece of media didn't get censored, if the politicians were against it, it would definitely make an impact on its success. Bill Clinton signed a Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act in 1994, which made rehabilitation and treatment of prisoners a lot harder in America. The public's perception of criminals at the time was extremely negative anyway, and this outlook of prisoners partly resulted in the 1994 film The Shawshank Redemption being chastised. This was mainly because the movie had a more positive outlook on criminals. It ended up tanking at the box office, but now of course is one of the most loved films of all time. The Simpsons eventually created an episode that dealt with censorship, and this was titled Itchy and Scratchy and Marge. The premise is that Maggie watches the Itchy and Scratchy show, and then she later attacks Homer with a mallet. Marge then blames the Itchy and Scratchy show for Maggie's actions. It's basically a commentary on if media can cause violence, and just how absurd the people who try to censor it can get. Marge ends up protesting all the time against Itchy and Scratchy, and because of this she becomes way less involved with her family as time goes on. So some could suggest that the parents who spend all their time trying to censor content is more damaging than letting their kids watch it. Marge's protests end up receiving a lot of support, so the producers of the show have to come up with a response. The writers decide to make fun of Marge in the new Itchy and Scratchy cartoon by including her likeness in an episode. Marge ends up appearing on Springfield News, and this results in so much more backlash for the Itchy and Scratchy creators. The showrunners end up asking Marge for how to write an Itchy and Scratchy episode in a non-destructive way. Marge gives her input of course, but it ruins the show. All the creative slapstick and funny gags have now been completely stripped from Itchy and Scratchy. The Itchy and Scratchy show has now become a soulless shell of its former self. And because the kids now hate Itchy and Scratchy, they actually go to the outside world for once. Later on, the mob crowd that Marge started wants the famous David statue to be censored, but Marge actually likes the statue. Marge then realises that she's a hypocrite for only censoring a certain thing that she hates, and the protests eventually stop, and then thankfully Itchy and Scratchy return to normal. This is overall a brilliant Simpsons episode. It's a great subversive commentary on a real life social issue that was happening in the 90s. And also because censorship is still very relevant today, and mob mentality feels exemplified massively due to the internet. this episode holds up extremely well. The episode is clear on its intent by the chalkboard gag itself, as it has the phrase, "I will not pledge allegiance to Bart," which is surely a reference to how many schools try to censor Bart Simpson. The episode comments on the good and bad parts of censorship. At the end of the day, it comes down to common sense. If a normal kid watches an edgy piece of media, it's not really going to harm them. And you know, I don't think babies were the target audience for Itchy and Scratchy anyway. And another reason why this episode is so brilliant is because it doesn't pick a side. It's not anyone's fault 100%. The answer to how we as a society deal with the topic of censorship is layered and nuanced. This way it doesn't leave anyone in the dark and it allows us to have a healthy debate about it. The fact that the children of Springfield actually go outside for once and start enjoying it shows that, in a way, consumerism can be very damaging to individuals, and maybe consuming media all the time is the actual issue. And although the episode does suggest that censorship shouldn't exist, it does show that sometimes a bad situation can result in some positives. Because at the end of the day, Marge's heart is in the right place. She isn't trying to censor Itchy and Scratchy for the sake of it, but the way she goes about it and the fact that she doesn't want some things censored suggests that maybe a sole individual shouldn't be responsible for making those important choices. It's funny how time changes people's perspectives. Back in the 1990s, The Simpsons was seen as the controversial edgy TV show. Like the Itchy and Scratchy and Marge episode, even when I was growing up I knew kids who weren't allowed to watch The Simpsons. Just like how Bart and Lisa weren't allowed to watch Itchy and Scratchy. However, that seems to have changed a bit over the years. The show has had a slow and painful decline in quality, and for many reasons The Simpsons is quite different nowadays. The change of the old writers and just lack of ideas have now made the show mirror the censored Itchy and Scratchy episodes. The Simpsons were a product of their time, and they sort of faded away. The same cannot be said about South Park, however. This animated sitcom was created by Trey Parker and Matt Stone, and it completely changed the landscape on cartoons and for what they could get away with on television. It has a similar formula to the classic Simpsons episodes, in which it takes a current topic and satirizes it to create a clever message, and of course the show is also incredibly funny. The main differences of the shows are just how edgy South Park is, and also how it just always manages to get away with it. The stark difference in South Park's tone is so noticeable right from the first episode. It's called Cartman Gets an Anal Probe. And of course, calls for censoring this show have been prevalent for the whole of South Park's existence. There are more than a handful of controversies, but for example, a singular episode received 5,000 complaints, and then another episode tried to show the Prophet Muhammad, who Muslims believe should never be drawn or depicted. And to be fair, this one was actually censored before it could even air. It's safe to say that South Park had balls of steel. The show has been running for over 25 years, and it's just about managed to stay consistently enjoyable. The show still feels competent because the South Park creators still write the episodes. You know, unlike other shows. But for me personally, South Park's magnum opus is the movie itself, released all the way back in 1999. This movie came out before most of the fan favourite South Park episodes were even conceived. It's a musical comedy film that tackles the idea of censorship and scapegoating. The film's plot is that the four main characters try to sneak into a cinema to watch Terrence and Phillip, which is in some ways their version of Itchy and Scratchy. They manage to watch the film, and the kids end up using that vulgar language from the movie at home and also in their school. Kenny tries to copy one of the moments in the Terrence and Phillip movie where they light their own fart on fire, but he actually gets killed trying to replicate it. This causes the adults of South Park to hate Terrence and Phillip, of course, so much so that they try and get them sentenced to death. Meanwhile, Satan and his boyfriend Saddam Hussein form a plot to conquer Earth. Yes, that plotline is completely real, I'm not even kidding. And yeah, it's safe to say that there's a lot to unpack here. To start off with, the film was rejected by the Motion Picture Association of America many times during post-production. Paramount Pictures required the movie to have an R rating due to the fact that technically anyone could see it with that age rating. But because of the movie's excessive profanity, the MPAA kept the rating to an NC-17. A child can technically see an R-rated movie if they're accompanied by an adult, but the NC-17 rating means that nobody under 17 could see the film, which would have resulted in much lower box office numbers. And sometimes the MPAA makes zero sense. The MPAA ruling that extreme violence can equate to just an R rating, but too much profanity can cause an NC-17 rating was criticised in the movie itself.
Just remember what the MPAA says. Horrific, deplorable violence is okay, as long as people don't say any naughty words.
It does seem very backwards that a piece of media is more likely to get censored if it has excess profanity. But you know, actual gory violence is fine in a lot of cases. South Park co-creator Trey Parker said that the MPAA had a problem with words, not bullets. The MPAA stated that if the movie exceeded 400 swear words that the film would have to be rated NC-17. The South Park movie ended up using 399. The film was actually originally called South Park All Hell Breaks Loose, but this was changed later because the MPAA didn't allow the use of the word hell. So then it was changed to South Park Bigger, Longer and Uncut, which is an obvious innuendo to something much worse. But the MPAA apparently didn't even understand the connection, and later regretted approving it. The movie was released just after the Columbine High School massacre, which resulted in 15 deaths. And due to the panic in the country at the time, the movie was scrutinised for potentially causing the youth of America to be delinquents. But scapegoating media like South Park obviously wouldn't be a cure to everything wrong with society. If all media was to blame and censored, the media we would actually consume would just get incredibly stale. The best pieces of art often push boundaries and make people feel uncomfortable, because a horrible truth is better than a boring snooze fest. And again, in some ways this is happening with modern media. The comparisons to the Simpsons episode are very apparent, like the fact that Carl's mum is the leader of the mob is just like Marge's character arc in the Itchy and Scratchy episode. Both pieces of media even include the characters arguing on live TV. It's safe to say that South Park was probably inspired by this episode. The outspoken, abrasive nature of these characters just show how far people will go to blame others on an issue which might be a little bit their fault. And the reason why the concept of Terrence and Phillip is so good is because it's an allegory on how outsiders see South Park. Terrence and Phillip are Canadian, and because of this they even have a cruder art style than South Park itself, which again is comparable to South Park in, you know, real life. And the whole Terrence and Phillip movie is just swearing and poop humour. It's very meta the way that the South Park creators made a movie on how a lot of the general public perceive their creation. And to any sane person, even if you don't like the series, you can't deny that South Park is much more than just swearing and poop humour. And that's clearly the message that the creators are trying to get across in this film. Censoring media often doesn't work because the people trying to censor the media are so black and white on what's right and wrong. And this just makes it so difficult to even reason with them. The parents get that desperate in this film that they introduce a V-chip for the more vulgar children. If they swear anymore, they get shocked. Free speech has officially gone out the window, and Canadian Americans get sent to death camps later on in this movie. On the surface, it just seems like extreme shock humour, but it paints a picture that censorship will result in only negativity really. Because the main difference between this and The Simpsons, in my opinion, is how much more this movie is against censorship. The film was meticulously thought over, and even the musical side of it works and has a clear message. This movie is often what people call the best musical movie if they don't really like musicals, and I would definitely agree with that. And the song Blame Canada, which is Carl's mum scapegoating Canada for all of her country's problems, was nominated for an Academy Award. The song is even more ironic because Carl's younger adopted brother is from Canada. I mean, if anything, it just shows the sheer hypocrisy in these situations regarding censorship. The South Park series used to have a running joke of Kenny dying. It was normally just a gag in the episode and wasn't really used to progress the story. In the South Park movie, however, Kenny's death is linked directly to the plot. Kenny dying is the straw that breaks the camel's back for all the protesters, and his death in the film is to show just how stupid it is to blame media for causing violence, because actually in this movie, it's the adult doctors that end up killing Kenny by sheer incompetence. What makes this film even crazier is the fact that Saddam Hussein himself wasn't offended by the movie when it was released in 1999, and he was reportedly forced to watch the movie on repeat by US Marines in 2003. Hussein also sent a signed autograph to the South Park creators, so someone who was repeatedly taken the piss out of in this movie, and was also sentenced to death for crimes against humanity, found the funny side in South Park. I guess that shows how backward society can be at times. Both the South Park movie and the Itchy and Scratchy episode hold up incredibly well years later, and if anything it shows that some things in society never change. It does seem like we will always be destined to go through the same issues in this world over and over again. So, is censorship actually warranted? Should a singular person or entity be allowed to call all the shots on what's right and wrong? Well, if Socrates and the Simpsons and South Park writers can tell us anything, it's that smart people don't like Karens. Thanks for watching.
It's junk. First class junk.